which is Western Lee Summit in Kansas City, a little bit of Raytown. I've been in the state house since I was first elected in 2018 and been serving. This is my last term in the house, and I'm running for Senate District 8, which includes out here in Blue Springs. So I wanted to start coming out here and doing some town halls, making sure that this area gets just as much love as over in Lee Summit. So I want to catch you guys up. There hasn't been very much going on in politics at the state or national level lately, and so there's probably not a whole lot to talk about.
I know what we ought to do.
So I thought I would go over special session. If you guys have any questions about what happened during the regular session, which ended in May, or the first extraordinary session that happened in June, or the second, and then we will go over all of special session that just occurred in September with the redistricting, as well as the sabotage of initiative petition reform. And then we can hit on what's happening at the federal level as well, with the government shutdown, as well as the implications of the one big beautiful bill. So, wanted to go ahead and get started with what happened at special session, the second special session, which, as you all know, Governor Kehoe was contacted directly by Donald Trump and was requested to redistrict Congressional District 5 to make this a 7-1 state as far as the congressional districts go. For those of you who don't know, we redistrict, we draw our congressional districts after the census, and that is delineated within our state constitution. And so we just did that 3 years ago, back in 2021, after the 2020 census came out. And so those lines were relatively new. And at that time, there was a push from the far right wing of the Republican Party to make it a 7-1 map at that time. Now, the vast majority of the Republicans voted against that because they believed that Kansas City should be represented by a singular voice in Congress, as they have since the Civil War, and that that's good for the Kansas City region. They also believe that it's important that that pendulum, if it swings, it's really nice to also have a Democrat that works well with a Democratic presidential administration when it comes to bringing funds back to the Kansas City region. So those were arguments that I remember being made by Republicans 3 years ago. Or 4 years ago. So another huge part of that is there was also a fear that if you draw distinctly partisan lines in such a way that you are having to take some more liberal areas and push them into other congressional districts, it makes those districts more competitive. And if that pendulum swings due to public sentiment or changing demographics in that area, that it can quickly become a 5-3 map. And so that was something that was also very much discussed 4 years ago, and then also during special session. So if you weren't paying attention, Donald Trump also reached out to the state of Texas, as well as several other conservative states, and asked them to redistrict outside of their normal redistricting schedule in order to give him more state Republican seats. Now, why did he do that? Because there are 435 congressional seats in the House of Representatives in the U.S. Congress. And 219 of them are Republican. And 212 are Democrat. And there are some vacancies there. And it requires 218 to have a majority. So they have their majority right now by one vote. One vote. And like I said, there are some open seats, but some of those are Democrats. And like we've seen in Arizona, with that seat that was just filled, they were refusing to even have her seated or have her swear her oath. This was now the third day that she has been in Washington, D.C. and has not been sworn into office. So it is a very, very narrow majority, which is why the president is asking for this redistricting. Now, generally, and you could say that he's doing it for a million different reasons. Historically, the party that holds control of the 3 branches of government, during a midterm, there is pushback by the majority of Americans, and they lose seats, right? They lose the hold of that majority during that time. That's something that normally happens, and so he may have been expecting that. Or it could have been that he remembers back in 2018 when he lost control of Congress during, what was supposed to be a red wave during that midterm that never came to fruition. And so all of those things, plus, there are massive concerns with the economy. Lots and lots of polling has been done. Although we don't know what the exact job numbers are because the folks that were there to report those to the American people have been fired. We know from looking at statistics, we know by simply going to the grocery store and seeing what the costs are of things, that the economy is not in a good place. We're looking at, there are several different things that economists look at, such as how many folks are Googling bankruptcy right now, and how late people's mortgages are, how late people's rent is. Those are real factors in determining the state of our economy, and those can't be hidden even if the government is hiding our jobs numbers from us, right? And I've seen on the news lately, every single night they're talking about ways to afford your groceries. Every single day. How do you afford produce? Folks that are, different grocery stores across the country are starting to stop selling different kinds of produce simply because it's too hard to get to, right? It's too hard to get it, it's too expensive for them to purchase. They know that the people aren't going to buy it, and so it's gonna rot on the shelves because it's simply too much. They're calling this right now the hamburger helper economy. And that's because when we start to have a recession, the sales of hamburger helper go up exponentially. And as someone who grew up in a really low income household, I can relate to that. I love hamburger helper to this very day. But it is an indicator of the recession that we are experiencing or about to experience. And so when you have a president and a Republican Party that holds all three branches of government, and they are 31 points underwater on the economy, which is what they ran on in 2024, which was lowering the price of eggs and gasoline. Remember that? Mm-hmm. And now we're being told, well, this is Joe Biden's economy. This is not Donald Trump's economy. That's why things haven't gotten better. It has nothing to do with the tariffs, guys. Nothing to do with the tariffs. So when you are losing on the economy, when you are losing on the messaging, you change the rules halfway through the game, which is what they are doing. So by doing redistricting in the middle of the cycle, when we don't have the data that would reflect equal distribution of population between these different congressional districts, we don't have that data. There are massive population shifts within that 5-year span. We don't have the data to suggest that these are even equally distributed populations between these congressional districts. And these were a lot of the arguments that were made when this special session occurred. Now, I want to give you guys some background. Governor Kehoe did not want to call this special session. He had no desire to do this. He has a really good relationship with Congressman Cleaver. He did not want to do this. A lot of the Republicans in the House and the Senate did not want to do this. But they did. They did it anyhow, because there's one person calling the shots, and it is not a small government, don't tread on me Republican that was elected to office in Missouri. It's the guy who lives in the White House and is painting the entire thing gold.
Yeah.
That is who is determining our congressional districts in the state of Missouri. To the point that we know that no one in the state of Missouri drew these maps. Not only did they not draw these maps, they hadn't seen these maps until they landed on the Monday of the week of special session. They did not have the software in the state capitol in order to even access the maps and to look at them in any way, shape, or form. They didn't have access to the data. Because the first thing that my colleagues do when they are debating these things is asking about the different demographic makeups of all of these different congressional districts. Just simple questions, which is what you would do any time that you were doing redistricting. And so when they got a hold of these maps, finally, and they started asking the bill handler, who is the budget chair, his name is Dirk Deaton, he's out of the Joplin area. And they started asking him questions during the committee hearings. Who drew these maps? Where where did these maps come from? Tell us about the, you know, the demographics of these different areas. How do we know that, you know, the voter rights protected congressional district over in St. Louis is appropriately drawn to protect it? Because that is a majority minority district over there, and it's really important that it is maintained. That is maintained by, you know, federal law, that is maintained in that way. And there was absolutely no way that, it was, the bill handler simply said that he didn't have access to that information at that time. The governor's office, who supposedly drew the map, according to the bill sponsor, wasn't available to ask questions. And when it came to my committee, which was the Rules Committee, the Rules Committee is a committee that is kind of the stopgap between the Committee of Origin and the floor for debate. So it's kind of that make or break moment. And generally the bill sponsors have to be present. He was not. And not only was he not present, there was no representation by the governor's office that we could ask questions to. Because my question repeatedly was, who wrote this? Who drew this map? And they would simply say, well, we heard it came from the governor's office, but we know that they did not have the software to even write this map or access it prior to the map being delivered to the House. In fact, the vice chair of the state Republican Party, her name is Jennifer Bukowski, she lives in Columbia, Missouri. She stated in an article written by the Missouri Independent that she had not seen it the week before it was sent to the House of Representatives, that apparently that no one in Missouri was good enough to be able to access it. So that's their own Republican Party was saying, no, we have never had access to this map, we know nothing about it, we've been completely cut out of the process. And not just cut out of the process, they were told explicitly, these are the maps you will pass, do not amend them, do not change anything. Nothing. And so for the first time in the history of the Missouri House and the Missouri Senate, no amendments were entertained in either body. Again, from the don't tread on me small government Republicans, they were handed something by Washington, D.C. and told explicitly, do not change this under any circumstances. And they said, yes, sir. Absolutely. And so while the Democratic Party, we knew going in what was going to happen, that it was going to be passed, that even folks that would pull us aside and be like, hey, we know that this is wrong. We know that this is, you know, outside of the norms, that this violates our own principles as Republicans to do something like this. Because the arguments that were being made on the floor were, oh, well, California's doing it. Oh, well, Illinois' done it. Look at Illinois' map. Look at how they've gerrymandered it into existence. So their argument is, that's really bad, so it's fine that we're doing it too. Which is a really great argument for my 9-year-old, right? But it shouldn't play out when you're an elected official. That you don't like the way something's done. You think it's immoral, you think it's unethical, and so you're gonna go ahead and do it too. And so those are some of the arguments that were made. It's really, really distressing to see, you know, our governor, elected officials on both sides, and both chambers, in both the House and the Senate, completely disregard their own morals, their principles, the oath that they swore to the Constitution in order to make sure that they are not going to get a primary next year and to stay in the good graces of the White House. But that is absolutely what happened. The good news is the referendum process has begun. There have been multiple lawsuits on both constitutional basis and because there is allegedly some discrepancies in the map where there is a precinct in Kansas City that has been put in both Congressional District 4 and Congressional District 5, which is obviously a very, very huge mistake. And once you have access to the maps on the software, you're able to see that. But if you didn't have access to that software prior to those maps being put into a bill and sent to the House committees, you wouldn't know that, right? And these bills were not thoroughly vetted by anyone on the committees, any of the committees, because we simply did not have access to them prior to that. We had absolutely, and you know, these bills, both of the bills, both the IP sabotage bill as well as redistricting bill, were noticed up and just as quickly as they possibly could. So you have 24 hours is the minimum that you have to post a bill, because you're supposed to allow the public to come comment, to come oppose it, to come offer information, to come support the bill, even to support the bills, right? We're supposed to be doing the work of the people. The people should be able to vet their congressional districts, because it's not just affecting 5, right? It's not just not affecting Congressional District 5. It's affecting every single congressional district. And everyone in the state of Missouri should be concerned when their own representatives and state senators didn't have access to this information, weren't provided enough information, and voted on it anyhow, without the ability for them to offer public comment. And so the bill was passed. There is a referendum process. I believe that our petitions available in the back, and right here with Representative Kemp Strickler. If you have not signed it and you want to, please do. That referendum, they have 90 days from the day that they started collecting, which somebody's gonna have to tell me how many days we have left, but I'm gonna guess probably around 80?
Probably lower now, probably about 75 or
Okay.
something like that.
So for those of you who are unfamiliar with our referendum process, it is simply the people's check on the government. It's a way to repeal any piece of legislation that the legislature passes, that the governor signs into law. And so with this, it would be a simple repeal of that. It would be a repeal of the redistricting bill that was passed. And what would happen is that it currently requires 109,000 votes, or I'm sorry, signatures, in order to go onto the ballot. And the governor would choose when that election would occur. My guess would be probably April. I think that there is some kind of statutory conditions that he would have to adhere to. I've heard April is the likely choice for that. It would be a statewide vote, and so there would be a massive campaign. And I've heard that the DNC is all in on assisting that process in that campaign to repeal the redistricting. And so there are several different fights on the horizon, both in the courts and amongst the signature gatherers at this time. And so that's what's happening with redistricting. Before I go on, does anybody have any questions or comments about redistricting? Yes.
I was at your meeting in Lee Summit, and you put up the current map of the districts and the one you thought, they were gonna vote on. But I don't understand about software, but when we looked at the one we knew they wanted, no one could tell two areas. Areas were in 2 districts. I don't understand that. Seems like they were all designated. I don't understand.
Right. So the argument that has been made by the governor's office is that it was a simple glitch within the software, and that it didn't affect the actual legislation. And that is obviously a point of contention between the plaintiffs and the governor's office. And so that is one of the pieces of the lawsuits. There's also concerns that CD5 and CD4 were divided along the Troost line, which is historically the racial dividing line in Kansas City. And so there are concerns around the constitutionality of dividing amongst racial lines. And so we will see how this pans out. This is going to be groundbreaking. Like, we are on uncharted territory. We have never done this before. This has never been something that has happened in the history of this state. And so we are all along for the ride together. Historians will absolutely write about this. I'm tired of living in unprecedented times. I'm tired of saying unprecedented times, but we sure are. And so that is that. Does anyone else have any questions about redistricting before we move on? Yes.
How are we doing with the rural areas? If the redistricting does occur, can we pull from the rural areas?
Pull from the rural areas in what way?
The redistricting includes more of the rural areas in these districts. So are it's the rural vote flipping? Are we seeing that happen?
So the point of the redistricting was to dilute the Democratic base of power in the Kansas City area. And so they split Kansas City into Congressional District 4 and Congressional District 5. And both of them pull from way far out in the rural areas. I believe 4 goes out to Jefferson City and 5 nearly goes out to the other side of the state, if I'm not mistaken. And so they absolutely pick up a lot of those rural areas in order to try to dilute the Democratic voice in Kansas City. And you know, the problems that I have a million problems with this, but when you talk about communities of interest, which is something that you're absolutely supposed to look at when you're talking about redistricting, there's not a whole lot that folks, you know, have in common who live in Ward Parkway or in, you know, off of Troost with folks in Jefferson City or, you know, in Cole County. There's just, they are looking for different things, and it would be very difficult for any congresswoman, any congressperson, be it a Republican or a Democrat, to advocate as strongly for all of those different groups, right? You know, there was a time prior to redistricting a few years ago that Congressman Cleaver represented Lafayette County. And while he did a great job, he's an expert on the Kansas City area. He is. And there are congresspeople that are experts on the rural areas. The idea of having a representative democracy is that you are embedded within your area, you know, you are a member of this community, you are representing the values and the interests of the folks in that district. And that is very, very hard to do when you are going from one side of the state to the other. That's why we have US senators. And that's the point of that. Yes?
Yeah, and I was gonna say, I think Blue Springs, like Lee Summit, it moves us from District 5 to District 4.
Right.
Which takes us down almost to Joplin on the
Yes.
south side, so like 3 counties away from Arkansas. And it moves us all the way, and at the edge of it, I think, is getting pretty close to Rolla, out by Fort Leonard Wood and all that. And so this gigantic thing, and as Keri said, it also goes up into that slice from Troost west, you know, all the way to downtown, I believe. So it is stretching us so many different ways, and we clearly in this area, the metro area, are so much more aligned with the Kansas City area and
Right.
you know, the things that we need as a metro area, I guess.
And for those of you who don't know, like the House of Representatives, our Congress people are the ones who write the budget. And so they're the ones who get money in the budget for our infrastructure projects here in the Kansas City metropolitan area. And generally the ones that represent the rural areas, you know, focus on rural development issues and, you know, things like rural broadband and things like that. And so it's going to make it more difficult for whomever you know, is elected to those 2 congressional districts to advocate on behalf of all of their population instead of just part. Yes?
I was just gonna say, to add context in Blue Springs has pretty much always been part of this gerrymander issue. We, even in the previous maps, Blue Springs always gets split and cut up. So I haven't moved, but I've been in districts 6 and 4.
Yeah.
And now getting split up again. So we've already experienced this issue of not having common interests with the representatives that are supposed to represent us.
Yeah.
Because they're off either northwest Missouri or northeast Missouri or further south, and they're not coming here. They're not listening to us.
Right. Right.
So.
Well, and you've got to think that it's gotta feel the same for rural areas. If you have a congressman or woman that, you know, is based out of the Kansas City area, and they're also supposed to be representing a very, very rural area, that they're not being heard. Their values are not being reflected, right? In those votes and in the biggest thing that our Congress people do is really not passing laws, but it's advocating for money in the federal budget to bring it back here, right, to their congressional districts. And it's going to make it really, really difficult for them to do that because they're going to have diverging interests. Yeah.
And different schools too.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, any other questions on redistricting before we move on?
I have a question about something you said before, but wasn't on redistrict. Okay, the Democratic woman that was recently elected, you said she's been in, what state was that again?
Arizona.
Okay, I don't understand why, how that could happen, that she's not being, whatever you wanna call it,
Right.
what
She
is
has
it?
not been sworn into office.
Yeah, that's it.
Yes, yes. So, an Arizona congresswoman, I can't remember her name off the top of my head, but her father, was a long, time congressman in Arizona, and he passed away in office. There were, I was talking about those vacancies in office, most of them are folks that passed over the last couple of years, and just there has not been an election cycle yet. Okay, so she was recently elected to her father's spot in Congress, and I think the first day would have been Monday that she could have been sworn in. The Speaker of the House chose not to do that. And then after the government shut down, he declared recess, and all the Republican Congress has gone home.
Okay.
And so we don't know when